Thanks for tuning into TellyCast. Before you listen to the show, I wanted to let you know about our next content industry event, the TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios. It takes place at BFI South Bank in London on the 10th of November. The first event of its kind in the UK, it will create an environment for producers, podcasters, brands, media agencies, platforms and the wider content industry to gather, learn, debate and share insight on the business opportunities in the fast-developing world of digital-first content. Panel sessions during the day are designed to provide actionable insights and will focus on production, development, community building, IP, formats and brand-funded social content. Speakers include senior execs from Meta, BBC Studios, Lad Bible Group, Channel 4, Future Studios, Audio Boom, The Sidemen, Jungle Creations and more to be announced. The lineup also features top creators, including YouTube star Joe Sugg and Danny Robbins, creator of podcast turned TV series The Battersea Poltergeist. And our moderators include Creatorville's Sam Barcroft and former YouTube Originals Commissioner and Executive Producer Luke Hyams. Tickets are strictly limited and only available at telecast.com/events. TellyCast listeners can also get an extra £20 off the ticket price by using the promo code TellyCast+. We'll see you there.
TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to another TellyCast. On this week's show, we're looking ahead to MIPCOM and MIPjunior, taking place in Cannes this weekend and into next week. My guests are kids TV expert Genevieve Dexter, Maurice Wheeler, MD of family marketing agency We Are Family, and Jimmy Humphrey of Marmalade Sky. They're all coming up on this week's TellyCast. My first guest on this week's MIPjunior and MIPCOM preview show is kids content industry expert Genevieve Dexter of Serious Kids. Genevieve, welcome to TellyCast. How are you?
Thank you. I'm feeling good, thanks. All ready for MIPCOM.
Well, we're in that last stretch, aren't we? The last few days of slight panic from some people, but other people seem to be very calm. The ones that are very calm, you always think, oh, are they really that calm? Let's see. We'll all see down on the croissant, I'm sure. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Genevieve, because I know you've been involved in the kids industry for a number of years. And it's not just Serious Kids. You have two businesses, don't you?
That's right, yeah. So Serious Kids is the distribution and executive production company that I founded about 12 years ago now, coming up for 12 years ago. And then I Present, which is an animation studio based in Hoxton, we set up about 8 years ago.
Right, okay. With your distribution hat on then, What do you look for? Is it pure animation that you work in?
No, we have a very eclectic library from, live action to animation, to stop frame animation, in the same way that Aardman used to produce CG, 2D, and then factual entertainment. We want to be able to give our buyers everything that they need. Right.
Okay. But you're specifically focusing on the kids industry as such.
Yeah, kids and family. I mean, some of them go across the divide. So, for example, Ronnie the Robber's Daughter from Studio Ghibli, I would say, is more family. Primetime, ditto The New Legends of Monkey from Seesaw. In fact, we do represent quite a lot of companies that are in the primetime space, like Hat-Trick, Seesaw, Studio Ghibli, or they're in feature films and they need advice in the kids' TV area.
We did have some conversations deep in the dark days of lockdown about how well animation was coping, because obviously animation was carrying on. There was, live action was obviously suffering, but animation seemed to be relatively unscathed. Is that true now we look back at the pandemic, hopefully?
We had a COVID baby at I Present. We're producing Best and Best for Nickelodeon worldwide, and that was set up, produced, and is wrapping next week. all done completely remotely. I think it was a shock for people who were in production in a studio and then had to disband it remotely. That would have been very difficult. We signed the deal with Nickelodeon and Nelvana in Kidscreen in February 2020. And so everything was set up remotely. So from that point of view, that's been okay. It's just not so much fun.
Do you think that there are changes that the animation industry went through, though they will never return to the types of businesses that there were pre-pandemic? Do you think these lasting changes have now been affected by COVID?
Yes, I think so. But I think things do tend to come full circle in that people used to choose a studio to work at because they wanted to work with a particular director or a particularly cool company like ourselves, of course. And now that, the money has got so good to work remotely, is that a lot of people are just picking the best paid job. That's been pushing up the prices and the budget. So, but I hope people will come back round to, wanting to be in the same space as other creatives.
So do you think the kids industry now is faring particularly well? Let's keep focusing on animation as such. So it was relatively unaffected, or perhaps not as affected as other areas of the kids industry. How's it faring now? Presumably there are new buyers coming to the market. Are we seeing fast channels? Are we seeing the explosion of new channels and new buyers that have been the result of lockdown in the same way that the rest of the content industry is seeing?
We're at a little bit of an impasse, actually, because there are these sort of cyclical boom periods. So, for example, from a distribution point of view, the SVODs like Netflix were buying a lot of content or co-commissioning a lot of content. So if you had a deal with the BBC, you could go to Netflix and do a co-pro and get it off the ground fairly easily. And now, Netflix is not co-commissioning animation. They only really want to buy second window product that is working in at least 10 major markets. That's a sort of a bit of a closed door there. But on the other side, we have now been able to set up our own Amazon platform. We've started doing a lot of self-publishing, direct to consumer, which is starting to bear fruit. So that'll be interesting.
Okay, is that under the Serious Kids banner
yes.
then? Or?
Yeah, under the Serious Kids banner. Animations, we've always been good at co-production because the work split is nice and easy. You say, right, you do the voice record, you do the scripts, I'll do the animatics, you do the animation, and you can do the post. So you can bring multiple parties together and raise the funding that way. That's super flexible. And there are new, like Italy now has quite a big tax credit. We hope that the UK will get an increase. We're campaigning through Animation UK, we're campaigning for a larger tax credit to rival Ireland. So I'm hoping that some of those new models will start to come through. But I do feel at the moment we are a little bit of an impasse.
It's a very international industry, isn't it? Particularly animation,
yes.
When you look at, because, traditionally you've had a lot of animation or a lot of animators based in Asia, India, for example. Is that still the same? I mean, has the locations of co-production partners changed that much over the last few years, or are we still focusing on those major territories that are the key players?
We've done lots of different models. I mean, we've just done the first ever UK, Finland, Canada co-production. It's getting creative. The different governments are always trying to pull animation into their territories because it's tech heavy, but it's not space hungry. So all countries have a strategy to bring more and more work into their own. So, for example, the Canaries now has 50% tax credit, which is probably the strongest, and so that element of sending everything to Asia is quite an old-fashioned model. Before we had all of these tax credits in Europe, that was definitely the case, but I would say less so now.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So we're looking at various different territories in Europe becoming more competitive with India because of the government tax credits, and so it's a slightly more level playing field.
Yes, and also India is is a burgeoning country now. It's no longer where you go to get sort of cheap animation. I mean, you might go there because you want really superlative animation, but you wouldn't necessarily go there for cheap animation. That would be sort of going into Malaysia. But I don't know, as these countries grow, they're no longer cheap. And then you have to, always do two budgets. And sometimes I do a budget of, so what happens if we do the whole thing in the UK? What happens if we send the whole thing to the Far East? And the difference is not that big anymore, especially with the pound.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. We're a few days away from MIPJunior, the first MIPJunior back at the Marriott, which is its kind of a spiritual home, the 30th MIPJunior. For people who perhaps haven't been or are curious to know a bit more about the market, can you give us an idea of how the market differs to MIPCOM, which obviously is its sister market that happens from Monday onwards, and MIPJunior happens Saturday, Sunday at the Marriott in Cannes. Can you give us an idea of the format of MIPJunior and why it's different and how it's different to MIPCOM?
So as a distributor, we are able to load as many programs as we like into the MIPCOM Junior library, which went live on the 1st of October. So buyers are able to go online and preview all the new content being launched at the market. And also on site, you go downstairs and there will be lots of screening booths where the buyers can do their homework essentially before the market starts. So that's quite different. And then we as distributors get reports at the end of every day of who's viewed what, who's requested screeners, who's interested in the rights. And it provides, wonderful leads for us.
Are you there for the rest of the market? So the Saturday and Sunday is about generating leads and seeing who's watching the content and requesting rights. Do you then set up the meetings Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? Is that how it works?
Well, hopefully we'll have meetings already set up with most of our clients, and they will come to our stand at MIPCOM. But the difference is that when they come to the meeting, hopefully they've viewed all the programming and you can have a constructive conversation as opposed to, oh, yeah, it looks nice, send me the screener.
Right. Okay. So it's less about pitching. The screening library does that for you. It's more about negotiation.
That's what the aim of the market is to make sure that when you get to MIPCOM, you're having, real conversations about your new content. So, so for example, we took delivery, often these shows are delivered at the last minute. So we took delivery of the Sound Collector, Flicks and Ghastly Ghoul like a week ago. And so the pressure is on for us to be able to get our buyers to view those new programs, not waiting till MIP TV to close.
How important is MIPJunior then to Serious Kids as a distributor? Because I know there are a number of events all around the year, but this is the big one, isn't it? This is the big one for sales. Is it the most important market when it comes to sales for you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, MIPCOM Junior is huge and we can get, lots of lovely leads that we can follow up for the rest of the year. I'm hoping that it will be as strong as it used to be. But of course, we will be missing a lot of the Asian buyers this year. Let's see how strong it is, because last MIPCOM Junior was not very strong. It didn't come back in the same way, and I think a lot of markets are facing that difficulty. But there are also the seminars going on, and there are a few sort of pitch parties and things like that to attend as well. So there's quite a lot of demands on everybody's time at the market. At least that everybody who's there is focused and interested in what you're doing. Whereas once you go into MIPCOM, you've got thousands of people who've got all sorts of different interests, and so it's great to have a focus for kids and family.
I'm interested in the screenings idea that there is the platform. That's been the case for a few years, has it? That's something that MIPJunior brought in a few years ago?
We used to have to, they used to have a library with VHS cassettes, and of course, it's evolved over the years. And it's funny because actually the first ever MIPCOMs I went to like 30 years ago, you would have screenings on the stand. People would phone up and say, I want to book an hour to view this movie. and they would come and sit on your booth and screen them.
Right.
And now you're lucky if you can get somebody to look at a promo.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds incredibly efficient the way that it's done. We've also seen a lot of virtual marketplaces, haven't we, that sprang up about 3 years ago that are purporting to offer a virtual marketplaces as an opportunity to buy and sell content. Have you found those very effective at all, or do they sort of just scratch the surface compared to what we're talking about at MIPjunior?
Where the market will set up your meetings for you, they're good. So, for example, we register for MIP China, and you put in all the program, the type of programs that you have, and then, they match you to certain buyers and your diary is set, for meeting new people. That's great. But otherwise, I don't see the point, because we're just all doing Zoom. We're all in our own private market all the time now, aren't we? There's less emphasis on the markets, which is great from the point of view of, if you've got a program that's happening to be delivering late in November and you missed MIPCOM, because people are taking more meetings now via Zoom, it's not like you've completely missed the boat, which used to be the case before. So, but I think everybody's dying to get back to face-to-face, because it's just, so much more stimulating.
Yeah, of course. Give me an idea of where we are in the sort of the annual cycle of the buying and selling of kids' content right now, because am I right in saying that everything's now too late for this Christmas? I mean, because Christmas is presumably a big period for the kids' content industry.
It's too late in terms of programming, unless somebody's got, suddenly got a hole because of a late delivery. So, for example, we're launching a Halloween special down there, Ghastly Ghoul, and we have had a couple of people say, "Oh, I need that because, something else is late."
Right, in 2 weeks. So you'll actually sell something that, as long as it's all finished and everything, you'll literally sell it at this late stage for Halloween.
So, sometimes if it's like a sort of an emergency situation, but otherwise, what's happening at this year that's most important is that people have their budgets to spend by the end of the year. So the reason why MIPCOM is so important is that that's when the buyers have their budgets. They need to spend them for 23. You might do some deals, and people would say, but I want them to be dated 1st of April 23 because that's my new budget. But they will be given their budgets for 23 before they leave for Cannes, ideally.
When it comes to MIPjunior, you mentioned it's not just about the screenings and the buying and selling, but obviously that's a key reason that people are there. There's also a number of seminars and pitch meetings. You're going to be actually on a panel called Let's Talk About Financing, how to find the missing piece to finance your content. Do I look at the kids market in a similar way to drama? Because obviously a lot of it is produced in a similar way, certainly live action. But should we look at kids in the same way as the drama industry is kind of set up, in the sense that you need co-productions to have successful projects? Or, what other challenges around financing that face the kids industry?
Well, as I say, usually, we are basically the forerunners of international co-production and sort of always have been. And so the kids industry is incredibly sophisticated in that regard. And, the finance is made up of, could be venture capital, it could be tax credit, subsidies, pre-buys, you name it. It's extremely complex. And I think it's one of the areas in which we excel as an industry.
So that's going to be an interesting discussion then. You're together with a CEO of Toons Media Group and Ken Fair from Epic Story Media and Judith Chan from Coots as well. Yeah. So there's obviously a lot of expertise on that panel about how you find the missing piece. And I suppose, as a producer or a distributor, that's one of the key skills you need, isn't it? It's not just about putting a deal together. You have to be aware of all of the different ways that you can slice and dice a project in order to get it off the ground. You need to be a real multi-skilled operator, don't you, to succeed, I imagine, in kids.
You do, but you can also, lean on somebody else in the industry to do it for you. There's lots of creators don't like going to MIPCOM. It's just not their bag. And so, but in that case, then you need to find somebody, like us or Ken or Jaya, to put it together for you. But the difficult thing is to know at what point to do that, whether you hand the baby over early or whether you wait until you've got some traction. But of course, if you've pitched it everywhere and everybody's said no, then it's a bit difficult to then take it to a distributor or a co-producer to put it together for you. So I think that's a really difficult decision to make.
Final question, Genevieve, because I know you'll be pushed for time in these precious few hours before you depart for Cannes. Just looking ahead at the future for kids content, and there's been a lot made of the metaverse, and there's a lot made of virtual reality and augmented reality. It hasn't really taken off, has it, up to this point when it comes to these experiential pieces of content? Do you see any real change in that anytime soon? Do you think that there's a massive potential there, or do you think that it's business as usual for the next couple of years at least when it comes to new types of content and new ways to experience kids' content?
I think at the moment, if you've got a big franchise like Spider-Man, for example, you would be creating things in the metaverse, NFTs, Roblox games, the whole shebang, because you need to be everywhere. But from the point of view of somebody with a new IP that they're trying to put together, not so much. But, Ken's got a company that specializes in doing all of these things and, he's busy. So, kids are kind of the early adopters. They're always the ones who know how to work technology whilst we're all still fumbling around with it. So the kids industry is always at the forefront of those movements. But yes, 3D TV never happened, but I do think there is a sort of inevitability about the expansion of the digital world.
And last question, the licensing industry is always, allied very closely to kids' content. Will we see a lot of potential licensees or on the Croisette as well looking to scouting for the next big franchise to get in early? Do we see a lot of that?
The master toy partners do come down, and they will be looking closely at all of the new shows being launched by the majors for sure. Yes.
Interesting. Well, Genevieve, thank you again for coming on TellyCast. Look forward to seeing you down at the Marriott on Saturday, and best of luck with everything that's going on in Cannes for you.
Thank you. It's lovely talking to you.
My next guest on this week's show is Maurice Wheeler, MD of family marketing agency We Are Family. Welcome to TellyCast, Maurice.
It's great to be here.
Well, it's lovely to have you on the show and to get some insights into the kids and family business, which is obviously very pertinent as we're in the last few days before MIPJunior. Before we talk about MIPJunior, tell us about We Are Family and what it is you do as a business.
We are a global network of full-service marketing agencies. So we specialise in the kids, teens and family space. And as you say, we're full-service marketing. So that's everything from the research and strategy through to creative and then marketing. But specifically me and my team in the UK, we've got a slightly more focus on the kind of research and strategy side of the business.
Right. Okay. So it's not content industry specific. It's more about if you are a FMCG brand and you want to sell a new product to a family or a kids audience, are they your main sort of clients, or do you work for content industry businesses as well?
I guess anyone who's looking to speak to kids, teens and families is pertinent within our wheelhouse. But typically, most of our clients are within that kind of content, entertainment, media space. We do have other clients in the toy sector and FMCG sector, but typically the kind of highest demand for our services is slightly more within that entertainment, media, content space at the moment anyway.
Right, okay. So basically TV shows and licensed products potentially is the sweet spot, and maybe networks and platforms.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Okay. I gather you had a recent research project that threw up some interesting findings. Can you talk us through those?
We've done some interesting ones with Generation Z and their content consumption. And then we've also got lots of ongoing projects with clients as well. But the Gen Z project or Gen Z research project I did find particularly interesting in how it pertains to content and I guess the future of content.
Yeah.
And very much seeing what we're kind of terming as the kind of bottom up and top down content spaces and how they are both evolving. So by bottom up, I mean you're more UGC. So think more TikTok and YouTube type content. So, for us, by us content, if you want to use such terminology. And then you've got the top down, which is more your big TV production type pieces of content. So your, again, the kind of big TV flagships, but also just, general TV production that's kind of created by TV production industries for the masses. And what we found interesting is we're very much in a time now where the engagement with both of those sectors is almost equal with each other. The desire for content that's top down, the big flagship blockbuster content, is probably at the same sort of level as bottom up content that's created by TikTokers or YouTubers.
That is interesting.
Yeah,
I know that YouTube has been a really strong area for kids content, but I hadn't really considered too much about TikTok and Twitch, but obviously Twitch relating to the gaming area is obviously hugely popular. What sort of content are we talking about when it comes to user-generated content that's resonating with kids?
Well, it's a bit of everything and anything, really. I mean, so user-generated content, lots of gaming, I mean, particularly for boys, but it can be equally relevant for girls. But gaming content, so the Let's Play videos, but that's been around for dozens of years, maybe. That side is interesting, but it's more, again, the kind of content that's coming through, particularly for the older kids on things like TikTok, and whether that be dancing videos, whether that be sports videos, whether that be celebrity videos or prank videos. The interesting thing is that they're not necessarily seeking out high production values on those platforms. They're happy to kind of deal with the kind of lower production values, the plentiful content that exists in those spaces.
Right. So we're probably following a bit of a pattern that, now, this is dangerous. I'm making assumptions now, but slightly older audience than Gen Z. Look at the Gen Ys and Gen Xs, I suppose, have been, we know that they've been obviously consuming more and more content and from the platforms, but we're seeing that this younger audience is very much following along in this trend, perhaps to the point now where, as you say, there's almost a parity between the demand for content from the big studios and the high production and actually content from whether it's a Dan TDM, a YouTuber watching video games. He's probably really old now, so I'm still showing my age. Or similar. So what are the implications then, do we think, for the future of content production? Because, as we know, some of these animation projects that are focused within kids and even the live action, huge budgets and, really long production processes and development processes. Do you think in the future we're going to see less of that content made, or what are the implications for the industry?
First of all, I don't think it's necessarily that doom and gloom story as such. I think it's just about a sharing of eyeballs, if you like. What I'm definitely not saying is that the kind of high production value, TV production content is going to disappear, because I absolutely don't think it will. I think there's a fundamental place in the marketplace for that kind of big high production content, particularly within the SVOD and AVOD world. I just think that those guys are going to have to share some of their eyeballs and therefore share some of their attention and therefore potentially share some of their revenue and some of their power and influence with the, what I'm terming the bottom-up content. So they're going to have to appreciate that they're not going to be 95% of children's screen engagement is going to be on their content. They're going to have to just share a little bit of that engagement time with the rest of the content that's available for children that they seem to be, again, equally as interested in. Again, the survey that we ran, and this was a global survey across 8 different countries, pretty much across the board, we asked, this was Gen Z, but I don't see it being dramatically different from a younger Gen Alpha. We asked them, would you rather watch 40 minutes of TikTok or 40 minutes of television programs? And it was pretty much 50-50 between the two. So, and I think that that's settling now. I think that media ecosystem is mature enough that those two things, neither are particularly new in the world. So I would imagine that kind of parity between the two is settling now. So again, I don't see that being something that in 10 years' time we're not going to see any TV production, because I just don't think that's the case. I think we're now hitting a point of parity and potentially a plateau in the parity between the two.
There's got to be a loser somewhere on this. I mean, do we think that it's maybe the mid and lower budget content production sectors that might be struggling for this? Because if it's a case of, well, I'm going to spend, as you say, half an hour on TikTok or whatever other social media platform, or I'm going to sit down and watch, I don't know, something on Nickelodeon, for example, we're probably going to say that the content that they're going to choose is going to be must-have and generally higher budget content. Again, that's an assumption that I'm making, but is that true?
Not what we're seeing at all. The sorts of shows that, the kids are talking about watching at the moment aren't even new shows either. We've literally just come out of field where we spoke to about 50 odd children. And these were children between the ages of 4 and 12. It's not like the content that they're talking about is your mega blockbuster stuff. I mean, for starters, there's not that much mega blockbuster stuff aimed at that age range. It's not like Game of Thrones goes down there, or The Power of the Rings, or whatever you want to say. But on the upper end of that echelon, they're talking about Stranger Things, which is very much a blockbuster, but they're also talking about shows like Never Have I Ever, or even like iCarly, or old school like Nickelodeon shows like Thundermans. And it's not like there is this desire, particularly in the kids space, to go, oh, okay, well, if we're going to make TV, then it has to be massive blockbuster. I just don't see that being the case. I think overall, I don't think there is a specific sector within the kind of TV production world that's going to lose out, as it were, in inverted commas. I just think the overall pie is going to get a bit smaller, but I think the share between the size of project is probably going to remain about the same. I mean, ultimately, probably the people that will lose, I guess, are potentially, there's going to be less of a market. So there's, Netflix aren't going to be buying up as many shows. But as I say, I don't think there's a particular genre or budget of show that's going to lose out any more than others.
So this is generally the attention economy now, isn't it? It's very much focused around all of the, whether it's gaming platforms or streaming services or social media platforms. The battle is now around attention, isn't it? And so, as you say, the pie's getting smaller, and ultimately it probably means that there are less shows overall that are going to be made. There are challenges. I mean, how do you think then that businesses within the kids sector specifically should be looking at this going forward? I mean, is it more about investing more in social platforms and trying to create more content for digital first content, essentially, rather than having to rely on getting commissions? Do you think for a kids producer, for example, that might signal a shift in how they take their businesses going forward?
I think ultimately that, the job is always to listen to the audience as much as you possibly can. So I think that's going to be driving a lot of it is speaking as a researcher, I'm clearly going to talk to that space. But, I think listening to your audience and understanding exactly what your audience wants and being a bit more nimble with your production process is probably a good thing, particularly in such a dynamic space that we are at the moment, with things changing on a regular basis. I think that the days of putting 104 episodes in a can and then kind of going out and selling it, I think that's going to become more challenging and potentially not the right strategy going forward. I would imagine it's going to be a bit more dynamic in kind of produce, listen, learn, and produce again, which is ultimately is what's happening in the digital first space. So, I think it's not necessarily, I think what digital first enables you to do is to test and learn in a much more quick and dynamic ecosystem landscape. So it's not like I think that digital first has got anything magic to it other than the fact that it is a much more direct relationship between the producers of the content and the consumers of the content. If you put up a show on YouTube, you know exactly how well it's doing. You know what bits kids are engaging with. You want to know what bits they're not engaging with. And you can learn and adapt and evolve much quicker than you can when you literally just give a reel to Netflix or to Paramount Plus or to any of the one and go, here's my content, tell me how it's going. That's, I guess, the power of the digital first, is that ability to listen and learn.
And how do we see the creator economy coming into this? Because, I mentioned slightly flippantly Dan TDM. The only reason I know Dan TDM is because my son about 4 years ago was obsessed with watching his, half-hour videos playing games, and I'm sure many other parents listening to this will recognise that behaviour, which I still found slightly odd, but there we are. But clearly it's massively resonating with kids, and these individual creators are now in a really enviable position when it comes to influencing, young viewers. Do you see that as only increasing, and perhaps, the opportunity might be partnering and seeing how many of the more established players in the content industry can potentially work with these creators to partner up and create new projects and content?
I don't know. I mean, it's not like there's been any single runaway success. Dan TDM had his own show, and PewDiePie had his own show. And a lot of them, probably the only one that actually really had any success is Ryan's World. So that's probably the only classic YouTube content creator that has actually gone on to have, in inverted commas, kind of mainstream success from a traditional content creation perspective. So I don't think that's necessarily the way forward, because I think that I think that they want great quality content, produced by the people who are creating the great quality content at the moment. I think that they almost want that as a separate world to their kind of YouTube and TikTok world, which is just feeding a different need. It's feeding a different kind of content consumption requirement, if you like. So I actually don't think that the solution is, well, let's go into the influencer world and try and kind of, you could use them to say nice things about your show and use them as a marketing tool. And I don't think the solution here is to use those guys as your content creators, particularly the guys who, like Dan TDM, or like PewDiePie. I mean, he's obviously not really kids focused, but Stampy Longhead, I think those guys, I think they're great at making their content that they make, and they probably I wouldn't necessarily talk to them about how they can use their skill to create content that's great for kids in a traditional content world.
Now we're getting to parity, then it must be quite concerning for some members of the kids industry.
Yes, but I just think it's different. So I think that, when we look at something like traditional broadcaster SVOD, that's different, because ultimately SVOD is taking exactly the same content that existed in the traditional broadcast world, but packaging it and distributing it in a way that's just much more accessible to children. So that is something that you can see, again, and people have been saying this for years, but the demise of your classic traditional linear broadcast, I mean, that writing's been on the wall for 5 years now, and that's going to happen, because ultimately, what are they bringing to the table that an SVOD isn't? But that's very, very different to the kind of difference between what someone in the kind of content creator space, the content that they're making is answering a very different need. It's a bit like saying everyone's gaming, therefore they're going to take away from the TV space. It's answering and delivering it against a different need. So I don't necessarily even consider them to be necessarily competition with one another, other than the fact that you're just competing for attention and competing for time, because children only have enough certain number of hours in the day to consume content. So that's the kind of the competing space.
How about the cost of living crisis then that we're all going through now, and seemingly on a daily basis, the news gets a little bit worse, and we're thinking where we're going to be come January. But how is that going to impact on the kids industry, do you think?
I think a few things. So I think for starters, I think we're going to see, and again, we've been out doing quite a bit of in-home research recently, actually. One of the things I'm hearing a lot of, and I don't want to kind of, this is qualitative and not quantitative, so it's not, I don't have the numbers to back it up, but most homes I go into, they kind of go, I need to get rid of my Sky subscription because it's costing me 50, 60, 70 pounds a month. It's not really bringing me much that Netflix and Disney Plus aren't. So I think we're going to see the bigger, more expensive cable and satellite subscriptions dropping off very rapidly, and people keeping their kind of cheaper subscriptions in place. So I think that's one area that I see happening. I think the other area that I see happening is typically, when you tighten your belt, you as a parent who's buying stuff for their child for Christmas, they're going to want to make sure that it's a tried and tested brand. So, we talk about the fact that, brands really start making good money in their third Christmas, because that's the Christmas that parents go, okay, you've been around for a long time, you're a tried and tested brand, and therefore I'm happy to kind of invest in a bigger playset or in a bigger investment.
Is this mitigating the disappointment factor on Christmas Day then? Is that what we're talking about?
It's not necessarily mitigating the disappointment factor, it's more mitigating the I'm over it 2 months later factor. So I guess one of the fears that parents have is they, spend 70 quid on an amazing playset that their kid is really into the TV show at the time, but 2 months later the kid's gone, actually, I'm over that now and I've moved on. So they're going to want something that's probably been in the child's life and has been engaged with the child's life for at least a year. So if you're like a child's fourth favourite TV show, you're probably going to miss out slightly more in the cost of living crisis, because it's going to be your number one and number two shows where the parents are going to choose their investment, because they know that the child is more likely to keep hold of it and hang on with it and play with it, and it's going to get a slightly more sustained enjoyment level than they would get in previously.
It's the flight to familiarity, essentially, we're going to see a little bit more of in the as the purse strings are tightened.
Yeah, the flight to familiarity, absolutely. I mean, that's an interesting one when it comes particularly to things like authenticity of diversity and inclusivity. The familiarity piece makes it a bit more of a challenge for the kind of the authentic, kind of the diversity and inclusivity piece to kind of come in and kind of develop itself through the newer contents.
That's going to be a challenge for newer brands, and that's obviously has implications not only for the content industry but the licensing industry and the FMCG, toys, all of these areas. Interesting conundrum, but as usual, those who invest in their brands are probably the ones who are going to set to benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming on the show, Maurice. It's been interesting speaking to you. And is there any research that any of our listeners can go and find out? Where would they go and access that?
Jump onto our website. We've got an incredibly active blog, and that's we-r-family.net. Jump in the navigation, find the blog. We stick up a couple of new articles a week, and the Gen Z research should be going up there, hopefully in the next couple of days.
Thanks, Maurice. Great to speak to you. All the best. We'll speak to you again soon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Justin.
My final guest on this week's TellyCast is Jimmy Humphrey of Marmalade Sky. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Hello, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. You're very well known within distribution and the content industry. But for people that don't know you, tell us about yourself, a little bit about your background and what Marmalade Sky is.
I shall. Okay. So I'm Jimmy, and I've worked in distribution for 15 years or so, working at various different distributors, predominantly doing acquisitions, sometimes a bit of sales. I had a long stint at Fremantle, worked at Banijay, Passion and TCB. As a result of all the TCBQ stuff that happened a couple of years ago that everybody will have read about, there was all a bit of a change. I decided to have a change as well. So
that's still changing, by the way. So you've seen that Banijay just bought Beyond this week.
Yeah,
or they announced the intention to buy, should I say?
Yeah, absolutely. That sort of came as a bit of a surprise, to be honest, having been speaking to both of those businesses quite regularly. That was all kept fairly quiet, as these things are, I suppose. Not a huge surprise in the grand scheme of things, I suppose, in the continued consolidation, but
everyone's tooling up for the
exactly.
for the content wars. Anyway, so tell us about Marmalade Sky then, Jimmy.
So Marmalade Sky, it was, to be honest with you, initially set up very, very quickly as a consultancy vehicle for me while I was figuring out what I was going to do next. That was a couple of years ago. And over the course of that time, it sort of slowly evolved into a little business, which I'm really sort of enjoying, and it's sort of going from strength to strength. What I do is work very closely with producers to help them to raise finance for their predominantly unscripted projects. So that's sort of everything from working across their slate to raise pre-sale money directly with international buyers, attach co-production partners, and sort of very importantly, work with the distributors. That's sort of become an increasingly important part of what I'm doing. Obviously, like we were talking about just there, partly the consolidation, but also just, I think, the variety of distribution options out there now. I think there are a number of producers that find it all a little bit confusing and daunting. So quite often I'll work with producers that either don't have the time to try to navigate around 15, 20 different distributors for this new project that they have, or maybe they don't have the relationships. So I just try to help them sort of see their way through that and get the best deal possible on everything they're working on.
Right. Okay. So it's kind of similar to how Ben and Lilla built Drive, essentially, obviously as a distribution company, but also the production finance part of their business as well. Now they're obviously part of Blue Ant. You're essentially a consultant that's really working in production finance. Yeah.
Some people would call it an agent. I don't like to call it that because I don't wear dapper suits. Yeah, and the comparison to Lilla and Ben has come up before. I mean, I suppose, I don't know whether they did necessarily, but I don't right now sort of have aspirations to turn it into a distribution arm necessarily. It's just, I like just sort of working very closely with the producers and trying to help them, because at the moment it's not easy.
No, it's not. And that's one of the things then we had a recent production funding event, content funding event back in April, which was, it just, showed the number of different options that are out there for producers to piece together funding, which is more important than ever as budgets shrink and needs change and the whole industry changes. Tell us who you're working with. I mean, is it mainly UK producers or do you work internationally as well?
No, yeah, it's a real mix. A lot of it is commission-led, so a lot it's quite transient. A lot of it is sort of project by project, and then I'm moving on to the next thing. But I do have a few steady clients that I work very closely with. So there's EQ Media out of predominantly, I work with the Australian and New Zealand office. They also have an office in the US. They make a whole variety of programming, lots and lots of unscripted and also a lot of drama. So I'm sort of their guy in London, essentially, having all the conversations over here with distributors and buyers. And then I work with Curve Media in the UK. I've been working with them for 18 months or so. Those guys are really prolific, get millions and millions of commissions. They're great. For them, I just essentially do the distribution stuff for them, help them find the right distributor. There's a lot of people out there that are very keen to work with Curve, so they get bombarded every time they get a new commission, which is a nice place to be. And then another one that I've sort of been working with on a very ongoing basis, which is a very sort of separate client to the others, I suppose, is Red Bull Studios. So, that's obviously a relatively new business, not the Red Bull Media House side that's obviously been around for a long time. This is the sort of big premium unscripted space that's led by Bernadette McDade. So for them, I'm trying to help them identify shows that they can get involved with as a co-pro or...
Oh, right. So you're working with them looking for investment opportunities for Red Bull, essentially.
Yeah, so it's a slightly different hat to wear, obviously. So that one is not me representing producers. That's, I suppose, working on the other side and talking to producers to try and find best stuff on their slate to bring back to Red Bull. Yeah.
Interesting. And are those sort of projects from Red Bull, are they still kind of adrenaline sport focused?
No, so that's very much the Red Bull Media House side, which is obviously the more sort of branded marketing side of Red Bull, like essentially ways to, well, I shouldn't speak on their behalf, but from what I can see, the Red Bull Media House thing has traditionally been a lot of sort of extreme sport, adrenaline junkie stuff, ways to sell the energy drink. Red Bull Studios is very, very separate business. And it's all entirely unbranded content. They're trying to just invest in really big, exciting, aspirational, premium factual that they can sort of co-invest, distribute, license internationally. But they don't have it. It's not a destination. It's not for Red Bull TV or anything like that. It's more just things that it's a studio business.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. Can you give us any ideas of the sort of project that you might be looking for to invest in on their behalf?
For the Red Bull side,
yeah.
I mean, Bernadette's been on so many panels this year, and she obviously talks much more eloquently about all of this stuff than I would. A really good example of one that was the first one out of the blocks for Red Bull Studios, I suppose, earlier this year was the Mo Farah documentary, The Real Mo Farah, which was a co-pro with the BBC. That sort of gives a really good idea of the type of scale and ambition that they have for the business. And, that's this whole sort of sports adjacent area is really key for them. They've got a whole load of other verticals that they work towards as well.
And we're also seeing how lucrative and popular the whole sports doc market is. And as you say, the sports doc adjacent, it's a really interesting area.
Yeah.
We'll listen out for any projects that you're announcing over the next few months.
Yeah, well, those guys will be, and they've got a whole team that will be down in Cannes as well, Red Bull Studios, so they're worth speaking to.
Just picking up on something you said earlier on, when a business like Curve, or it doesn't have to be Curve, another production company, they announce their domestic commission.
Yes.
Is that what usually happens in your experience, that, when a producer announces a show and it's produced, for one territory, for example, if it's a Channel 4 commission or whoever in the UK, is that generally what happens? Then the welter of distributor emails come to that producer and go, we'd love to talk to you about this project for taking the international distribution rights. Is it as simple as that in most cases?
It can be. The likely result of that is that the rights are already well and truly tied up at that point. Certainly when I first started working in distribution, doing acquisitions, that was usually the point that I would get involved with something, to be perfectly honest, because it used to be Channel 4 would fully fund something and you'd make it, and then you think about distribution as sort of an afterthought. The nature of the business now is that distributors are increasingly called upon much earlier on in the process, of course. So by the time it's sort of announced in the trades, it's already firmly in someone's catalogue. And actually, one of the frustrations that I do take up with the trades and the various PR people is that the distributor should always be mentioned. It saves a lot of people's times. I never really understand. Quite often it's not, the distributor's not mentioned. It seems to make sense to me because, you're going to get inquiries about it. If people know where to go, it saves everyone a lot of digging around.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's true. It's and also distributor gets a nice little bit of free PR as well. Yeah, into the bargain. So MIPCOM, Jimmy, we're hurtling towards MIPCOM this week, just a couple of days away. So tell us what you're going to be up to down on the Croisette.
Oh, I'm really excited to go, actually. I haven't been, I missed MIP TV in April through just, despite going for 20 years or whatever, somehow just completely didn't think about MIP TV and ended up on holiday in the same week. So that was a bit foolish on my part. Yeah, I'm keen to get back down there, get back in front of everybody. Obviously, it's the first MIPCOM since 2019. So I think, sort of general feeling I'm getting from everybody is everyone's quite keen to get back in front of everyone, see everybody back in the old favourite.
Yeah, it's going to be busy.
Yeah.
Well, we had Lucy on a few weeks ago, and she was telling us it's around 10,000 delegates expected, which is almost pre-pandemic levels. I think it's going to feel quite hectic, isn't it?
I was looking through the delegates list the other day, and I think what's interesting and what's really telling, having all of us had 3 years away, is how different that delegates list is as well in that relatively short period of time. I was sort of noting how there were seemingly less sort of traditional, A&E, Discovery type buyers there. I suppose it's sort of natural that this is going to be the case, and a lot more Rokus and Plutos and Prime Videos. So, it's sort of a noticeably different delegates list, I think.
Yeah, well, it's indicative of those changes that have come in the pandemic, isn't there? And I think another thing Lucy said was there's a few new names around the beach area. I think Samsung are going to be there. Their content business or their fast business is going to be there. How do you approach fast then, Jimmy, from your perspective? I mean, do you get involved with fast channels, when you're representing producers? Are you taking content to fast? Are you speaking to producers about creating their own fast channels? How do you interact with this whole new area?
Yeah, a bit of all of the above, really. So, some producers that I'm working with have got very sort of deep back catalogues. So they've been investigating launching their own fast channels themselves. If they have sort of certain key brands in their catalogues, because most of the things that I'm working on, most of the projects are I'm trying to raise deficit finance. Typically, I haven't found a huge amount of opportunity on those yet, at least not in the kind of factual space that I'm generally in. I haven't found there to be a huge amount of opportunity because it's still, as far as I can tell, still largely a volume business that a lot of these guys are operating. But, I'm certainly sort of trying to help producers identify opportunities with things that might have been sitting on the shelf or perhaps have not been exploited internationally as well as they should have been. And obviously all of these new channels and AVOD platforms offer a huge new opportunity for that.
Yeah, definitely. There's, as a result of all of these changes over the last couple of years, the delegate list and the buyers list will look different as well, and there'll be the return of all of these big stands, because there was a MIPCOM last year, but obviously it was a much more focused event, and it was all within the Palais. And
yeah, I did go actually.
Oh yeah, you did go. Okay, yeah, there was.
I did go, but it was about 10%. That I don't know, it felt like about 10% full, and if I'm honest, I went for a break from the kids, but
right.
Yeah, there we are.
It was certainly nice to be back.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be MIP very much back in its in its heyday, really. Is there anything that you're particularly looking for during the week there, or the few days there, Jimmy, that is it just a case of seeing people again, or is there anything that's on your schedule that you thought, right, I need to be at that? Maybe any of the keynotes or any of the conference aspects of it? Are you back-to-back meetings?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much back-to-back meetings, I suppose, because I suppose it's slightly different to when I was working at a distributor, because then I was, if I was doing acquisitions, I was mainly seeing producers, which were largely in the pub. And when I was doing sales, it's obviously largely with buyers, and then you're back-to-back 30 minutes pitching. I suppose this time, because what I'm doing now, obviously, I'm sort of working with everyone. What's really nice, actually, is that it's a real mix of meetings, because so I'll see some producers, I'll obviously catch up with all the distributors, I'll see some buyers for me to do some direct pitching. So it's a nice mix of stuff. In terms of the schedule, I would always like to go to more things, but, it's always quite hard to fit it around the meetings. I'll try to go to the WIT conference, as it's sort of tradition.
Yes.
And, it's a nice way to sort of get a glimpse of some of the new formats, even though it's not necessarily my world so much anymore. That's always nice. You can just watch 25 promos while eating your sandwich, can't you?
Yeah, that's right. Well, Virginie is coming on the show down in Cannes as well, so she'll give everybody a bit of a sneak preview of that, so you'll be able to catch up if you listen to the MIPCOM special show. I suppose this event will be your first as an independent consultant, essentially, Jimmy. So your schedule is your own, really, which must be quite nice, quite freeing.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, I went to Real Screen in June, but yeah, I mean, this feels like, again, sort of the first really big thing that I suppose I'm going down to on my own steam with the Marmalade Sky thing. It's kind of weird not to have a base. No stand, obviously, now, so I'm sort of running around all over the place, which will feel new. But yeah, no, it is really freeing. It's quite nice. Yeah, I feel like I can just sort of see nice people that I like.
Well, as an independent consultant as well, I would recommend Mar Nolan's as your base.
I know it well.
Yeah,
I see you in there.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's always a friendly place to go in and maybe catch a little bit of football later on as well. And Jimmy, so I'm imagining we'll be seeing you in co-production entertainment Seaview Producers Hub, should I say, which is on the roof there on the Riviera. So that's going to be a big change, isn't it, this year?
You may well do, yeah. I mean, that certainly was new to me, that new event, and it'll be interesting to see how that sort of goes down. Most likely, I will be more likely in Mar Nolan's and Cafe Roma, like you say. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. Jimmy, I look forward to seeing you down in Cannes. I think it's going to be relatively sunny from what I can see. Oh, I haven't actually checked that. That's true. Yeah, hopefully. He says that. I'm touching wood. And maybe if you're there on Sunday, you'll have to come along to the meetup that we're having at Brown Sugar on Sunday night, 6:00. Yes, I will try to do that.
If you're there, Jimmy, it'd be good to see you there with lots of other people. Listen, thank you. Have a safe trip down to Cannes. Look forward to seeing you down there, sharing a beer or two, as well as doing some business and hearing the gossip of the market once again, which is something we've all missed.
Yep, sounds good. I'll look to you for that
All
bit.
right, okay. Cheers, Jimmy. I'll see you there.
Cheers, Justin.
Well, that's about it for this week's show. Don't forget, we're offering £20 off tickets to the TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios, for TellyCast Plus newsletter subscribers. Just click on the link in the latest newsletter. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. Next week, we're on the ground at MIPJunior and MIPCOM in Cannes. And we'll see you at our latest meetup at Brown Sugar at 6 p.m. on Sunday. Don't forget to RSVP. Until next week in Cannes, être prudent.